let us begin. Thanks for coming along. I really appreciate you being here. It would have been lonely with just me, and although Esther and I would have had a great time, it's much nicer to have a few people in the room at the same time. I want to talk about organizational learning, and how that conversation develops, I think, will be largely up to you. I've obviously structured today, very structured, to the next session and the third much looser, because for me, for this to be a success, the conversation has to switch pretty quickly from me to you, so that you take on board elements that you want to actually embrace in your organization, and you take on board ideas that you want to explore further. And by its nature, I'm not going to be able to do much in depth at this stage, but we will be able to drill down, if you want to, in certain aspects of the program. So I'm going to ask everyone just to say hi, just one sentence, because we don't really have time for much more, but one sentence about who you are. And I just want to make 3 preamble statements. The first one is that I've built in office hours to each session. So tomorrow there's office hours running from 9 a.m. Eastern, from 9 till 10. So that if anyone has got a specific question or something that is to do very much with their organization and not with the general discussion, please, I'm available. If you want to argue with something or query something or ask for more resources, then use the office hours. And if Esther's going to sort of close that at 5 later this evening Eastern. So if you want to use the office hours, just register with Esther. If at the end of this session you go, I'd really like to talk about something, rather than turn up tomorrow and I'm expecting no one, and 5 people turn up. So please just indicate that you want to use the office hours. They're purely voluntary. The second thing is that as we go through, I think that you are going to challenge me to provide resources and articles and goodness knows what. And rather than try to second guess you, I'll make sure that those resources are made available afterwards, so that I will put those resources into the shared resources cache. And I don't know what they might be and where you want to pursue it, but there are tons and tons of resources available. So if you want to have a deep dive, if you want more on, just ask and I'll do my best to find stuff that is suitable. Some things I'll probably be able to just put my hand on immediately. Other things I might take a little bit of a while to find, but I still want you to feel that this will be a resource-rich, evidence-based conversation, and not just my opinion that I thought about last week and I'll probably forget about the week after. This is a subject I'm absolutely passionate about, and it's based on a lot of thinking and a lot of research. So I don't want to sell you short by selling myself short. So we'll definitely embrace that. The third thing is that as we move towards kind of individual case studies, I'd like you to take the stage. That if you say, look, in my organization, there's a brilliant example of this going on, and that can be of something really positive that you want to share, or something beyond dysfunctional that you want to share. Both of those, and we are a safe space. No one is going to email the CEO or the CHRO to let them know what you said in a webinar. So you can speak freely, and I hope that we get at some of the successes, but also some of the frustrations that are involved in working in organizations. I think organizational learning is enormously important, and it's the key to a lot of things. Let me just share this with you very briefly. And this is before I even start. This is a quote from the, can you read that? It's from the Washington Post on the 22nd. It's now the 26th, so 4 days ago. There's a big article on the link between dysfunctional workplaces and human health. And one of the great dysfunctions is the expectation that people live and die on their own, that it's all about you. You should neither seek help nor offer help, that everything you do is all about you. It's not about the organization. You don't feel supported or respected within the organization. And there are a whole bunch of indicators in that article from Justin McDaniel, which I think are fascinating, around the 5 toxic elements. And if you add those, I'm not saying that I can fix every toxic workplace in the world, but I would like to look at healthy learning as part of a healthy workplace, I think. And I don't care what sort of workplace it is, it can still be a learning space. And it can also be a very much an unlearning space and an anti-learning space. And I'm working with a university at the moment, looking at learning spaces. And the idea that a university by definition is a learning space is complete nonsense. It's not. And there are lots of toxic environments within universities. So we'll look at this, I think, in the round, and we'll look at it writ large, and we'll try to come to our own conclusions and so on. So I'm ready to begin, but I would like just to go around the room and just, if you could ask, if we can go round with my order so that I won't miss anyone. We're starting with Scott. Scott is to my immediate left. So Scott, tell us one sentence about yourself.
Name's Scott Parker. I work at Software One with Jane and Serena, also on this call.
Yes.
I work with with them. I do the Software One Academy, do the curriculum design, and more broadly in the L&D ecosystem lead.
Excellent, thank you, Scott. See, I never would have found out that there's it's half the audience is from Software One. So thank you for that.
Good smattering, anyway. Yeah.
It's good smattering. Yeah. Go ahead. Next is Jesse.
Thanks. Yeah, Jesse Kemp. I'm our only learning and development specialist for Western Forest products and Pacific Coast, specifically Vancouver Island. Thanks for having me.
So that's west. That's west.
That's west, yeah.
Good. It's great to see you, Megan.
Good morning or evening or day or whatever it is. Megan Sund, I'm in Sydney, Australia. I am just about to hit 12 months at Fraser's Property Australia. So I met some of you last year just as I was starting a new position there. I am the sole learning and development person in that company. And lucky for me, unlike the quote and the discussion we were just having, I work in a really healthy, happy workplace that's very focused on learning and development, with, of course, some challenges, but Nigel has been giving me some coaching and mentoring since last year's LDC. And yeah, that's it.
What could possibly go wrong with that kind of support? Rich, what about you?
Rich James, I live in Columbus, Ohio. I am a instructional designer and learning strategist for Tier 1 Performance. Been here about a year. Before that, I worked about 20 years in higher education, doing a lot of different things. I'll just throw out one thing I'm wondering about, and maybe we'll get back to it. When we talk about individual learning, I have a fairly good understanding of the psychological, emotional processes and factors that go into that. We start talking about organizational learning, it gets a little fuzzy. And sometimes I feel like those personal factors kind of get forgotten about in favor of a lot of other things. So I'm wondering how those two stay connected as we talk about organizational learning.
Yeah, they are incredibly important that we keep them connected. Now, I was rereading in preparation Chris Argyris's book on organizational learning. And Chris Argyris never mentions individual learning. He mentions individual dysfunctions of the organization. But it's quite interesting that he wrote, and it's not a thin book. It's about this thick. He wrote an entire book and never mentioned individual learning. I don't see how we can avoid that. I think it's very important, and that alignment is really important as well. So you keep me right, Rich. Keep me right if you feel that I'm losing that. Thank you, Shelley. What about you?
Hey everyone, I work for a franchising organization in the wellness and beauty industries, and I lead instructional design and instructional strategy for them.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And my swimming coach, Heather Larson. Heather, hi.
Hello, I am Heather. I'm a learning designer at an online learning development company called Onlia. So we work with a variety of clients, and we're kind of poised for some big growth. And I'm also in a little bit more of a leadership role than I've had before. And so I'm very interested in, just as Rich said, kind of thinking about things at the more like system level organization type stuff. And yeah.
Good, excellent. We don't touch that, Heather, you come and bash me on the head. That's really important. Claire, what about you?
Hi, I manage project for training our customers in a company that sells 3D scanners and the related software. But I also support other teams regarding the development of their internal training. So whether it's HR managers, salespeople, and regarding L&D, that's about it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Claire. Jane.
Hi, so I'm Jane Tandy. As Scott mentioned, I work with both Scott and Serena at Software One. I'm the Global Operations Director for the Software One Academy, and my role is specifically focused on taking the vision, the curriculum design, the pedagogy, the frameworks and everything, building it into a global and scalable solution for Software One, and also ensuring that it works alongside our Software One organizational systems, processes, people and tools.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And Marion.
Hi everyone, my name is Marion Boudet. I am capability development at AstraZeneca in Toronto, and I work with the commercial sales teams, like the sales reps or pharmaceutical reps who call on physicians.
Right. So when you say Toronto, do you cover the globe or do you focus on a North American market, or how does that operate?
Canadian.
Canadian market. Okay, thank you very much. Lisa.
Hi everybody, I'm Lisa. I have my own consultancy running, facilitating and coaching in leadership and communications for clients across all industries really. I am in Sydney, Australia, so if that last sentence made no sense at all, it's 5 o'clock in the morning and I'm doing my best.
I know. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Two people up at the crack of dawn, so really appreciate that. Thank you very much, both of you, for braving the early morn.
Oh, you're worth it, Nigel.
Well, that remains to be seen. Okay, Jane, what about you? Julie, sorry, not Jane, Julie.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Kowaleski. I'm in the US in Madison, Wisconsin. I work for a tech company that has an app for cashback for users as an instructional designer. And so we're still pretty young as a company, and L&D is just starting to be formalized now within the company.
Okay. How young is young?
We're about 7 years old, but we're just rounding out to about 300 employees now.
Yeah, so you need more structure. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, got it. And Serena, final Software One. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again, Nigel. I'm Serena Gonsalves-Feash, and I head the Software One Academy, which is the Software One's corporate university, and I work with Jane and Scott. I work full-time for Software One, and I'm part-time trying desperately to finish a doctorate on the future of learning and accelerating organizations with two incredible supervisors, including Dr. Paine himself. I think that's it. Did I miss that? Oh, I'm based in London.
Great, perfect place, great place to stop. Thank you very much indeed. So let's just, I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to stop sharing it very quickly after that, because I want you to, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to do a bit of a Slido for me. So let me just put that up on the screen. You should be able to see that. And if you can either take a picture of the QR code or go to slido.com and simply add the number. When it comes up, you'll see in the left-hand corner, it says add code. That is the code, 1672987. So add that, and it's basically a word cloud. So just put in a word or 2 words. And the question is, why did you want to attend this? So what do you want to get out of it? So if you do that, we'll get a few words up on the screen, I hope, and then I can share those with you. I've got 3 Slido polls coming up. Well, this is the first, so 2 more Slido polls. We can stop using Slido if you find it irritating or getting in the way. But I just wanted to start with, if you could just say why you're here. Here we go. Let's just see what it says. Right, I can just, I'll give you the words in a minute. Actionable information, innovative approaches, learning about organizational learning, change, insight, innovative approaches. I said the actionable insights, useful mental model focus, I think that is. Insight is the biggest word on the screen. I'm going to give that to you in a second. Right, let me see if I can copy that. And if I can't, I will share it with you afterwards. Come on, Slido. Thank you very much for answering that. So that's 12. Everyone has said something, and linking individual performance to organizational performance, actionable insights, framework, expand, change, useful mental models for organizational learning, insights beyond individual learning, create real. It's jumping all over the place as things are adjusting. More robust design, focus on stakeholders, creating a framework, all of those things you've shared with me. So thank you for that. And we'll put this, rather than me trying to copy and paste it, I'll add it to the resources afterwards, so you can have a good look at it if you want to. So thank you for doing that. Now, I want to start by offering a little bit of context for you, and then we can begin to drill into this. This slide I borrowed from McDonald's, because I think that the point that it makes is really important, that if you're running learning in an organization, you've got 3 huge, in themselves, complex issues to deal with simultaneously. And what was said by McDonald's was that in a multiple franchise organization, this makes it even more difficult. But I think that all of you are working in increasingly complex working models. You've got staff, contractors, part-time, full-time, staff who work for other organizations that are with you full-time or part-time. The whole nature of the workforce is very, very different. And with all of that hitting you at once, you know, how do we respond? How do you deal with that? How do you begin to deal with it? Well, what worries me is that a single focus answer, a single focus learning model like this is just not going to crack it. This is from 1863. It's called the Nuremberg funnel. And I've badly translated it, but you can see what I've translated. You lack wisdom in some things, let the Nuremberg funnel tell you what you need. Now, that idea of deficit topping up of people's knowledge in the face of such uncertainty and complexity, you know, my preference is, this is my metaphor for learning. This is a picture I took basically outside where I live. This is a Roman mosaic discovered, as you can see, about 10 or 15 feet below the ground, of a space which is going to be used for, there's going to be office blocks and and various other things on it. So before they build anything in London now, they have to let the Museum of London, their archaeologists, have a go. And this is what they found, the biggest, most complex Roman mosaic that they found for about 70 years. And this is just a small part of it. It stretches on. This is the ground floor of a Roman house, which no one knew was there until they started to dig down. Now, if you look at the model of learning in this is not a funnel. It's a complex interactive relationship between 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people, each pooling their knowledge and sharing, and in a journey of exploration and discovery. So they start with a very complex problem and they work on it together and they come up with a solution together. It's not at all based on a group of individuals needing knowledge from outside in order to make decisions. They have knowledge, but in some ways, it is the fact that they're working together that makes this successful and a learning journey for all of them. And if you said to them that this is about individual learning, I think they would be very, very surprised, because it's the collective response that makes the most sense. And if you imagine that many workplaces are finding Roman mosaics under the ground metaphorically, then we've kind of misaligned the problem, the complexity, increasing complexity of the problem, and the naivety of the response, which is, you know, a kind of one-stop shop. And you know, I'm no longer convinced that more content is the way to deal with learning deficits. And I'm doing a seminar next week, I think next Tuesday, on skills. And what I'm going to say is that we don't deal with skills by focusing on skills. We deal with skills by creating an environment in which skills deficits and skills needs can be explored and embraced, and we build learning models that are not just about you don't know about this, I will tell you about this. Because there's all sorts of reasons why increasingly that doesn't work in the age that we live in. There's a whole culture and a whole complexity around that. And I'll talk about that later. But I just kind of love that photograph of people learning as they go, exploring literally, but also metaphorically, and working on a new body of knowledge. You know, that is telling that group something that they would not have known about the way Roman houses were built, the way mosaics were developed, and why that particular house had that kind of complex mosaic for its, you know, living room, basically, essentially. So that led me to think, I suppose, crudely and very selectively about paradigms for learning. I just kind of randomly picked a few big learning thinkers. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is these are all men. And the other thing you're going to notice is that they were all born quite a long time ago. The youngest of them is Robert Keegan, still going strong, born in 1946. And what struck me is that when I started looking at these, and you think of this as a kind of consequence of learning development, that Brian Skinner, Brutus Skinner, whatever his name is, Skinner is long while ago. You know, Skinner is old, it's behaviorism. Piaget is the opposite. Piaget is about mental models and learning construction, more modern concept of learning. But if you look, you see that Piaget was actually born 8 years before Skinner was born. And exactly the same year as Vygotsky, who died a long time ago. Vygotsky, the first person to talk about proximal development, i.e. learning in groups, and his research was focused on building learning zones and getting people to learn together. And in some ways, Vygotsky was talking in the late 19th century. We still haven't learned the lesson of Vygotsky. And Freire, born in 1921, we're still absorbing his concept of power models in learning. We call it the power paradigm. You know, Freire was saying that every piece of learning is a political act, and that by withholding and offering knowledge to groups and individuals, it's actually a power hierarchy place, and we should be self-consciously aware of that hierarchy. So I put these people there, not because that's an anywhere comprehensive list, but it struck me that the youngest of them, Keegan, took Piaget and said, Piaget's 4 developmental levels stop at the age of 18, because Piaget, and I would assume Skinner, and possibly even Vygotsky, believed that all learning and development finishes when you become an adult. You're done, basically. So all you need after that are, the basic skills to do a job, and pretty much you're static, you're formed, you're fixed. Your personality, your IQ, your ability, your development stage is fixed from the age of 18 for the rest of your life. Keegan, in the 70s, was a radical psychologist who said, hey, I don't think that's true. I actually think that there are at least 3 more stages of adult development. And he set out to encapsulate those and then prove it. And there's been a lot of debate about whether you can identify those as actual stages, and that he's proved that they exist. But certainly the idea that adults can't develop, that Piaget would have embraced, Keegan would have knocked on the head. And what is fascinating about Keegan, in the last 10 years, so at the end of his career and his life, Keegan realized that if adults are going to develop, it's in organizations that they're going to develop most effectively. So Keegan's last book, called Deliberately Developmental Organizations, DDOs, as he called them, which is another simple or more complex term for learning organization. Keegan realized that if you can set the conditions for learning in organizations to flourish, that individuals will flourish inside those organizations. So I just thought it was useful to highlight just how far back we tend to look for our reassurance about learning, and how there's nothing new in the world. If you read Skinner, and you look at gamification, gamification is no more than a modern iteration of Skinner's behaviorism. Skinner used pigeons as his examples of how humans and animals generally, but humans as well, learn. And he built learning machines to prove that kids can learn behaviorally as much as pigeons can learn behaviorally. And we've tended to kind of minimize and say, well, humans aren't pigeons, but we then, instead of offering people bits of corn when we pick the right button, we offer them badges and leaderboards when they say the right thing or make the most intervention. It is no more than behaviorism writ large. So it is not dead, it's relevant. But what I'm suggesting is that there are lots of complexities around learning. There are many researchers who have thought about learning in the decades since. And we tend to not understand that full complexity. And we don't use that knowledge to build learning ecosystems and learning models in our organizations. We tend to just take them as given. We don't articulate them. And that struck me as being not something to be deeply concerned about, but something to just, I want it just registered and put on the table. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing there and just ask if you've got any questions or any points that you'd like to make at this point. If not, we'll move on, and I'll give you another Slido to look at.
It's fascinating to me, Nigel, how we as individuals in the learning and development field view this, and how organizations view this from a different view. So, and I'm sure this will come up as we're talking about organizational learning and that shift in perspective. But yeah, for me, a lot of it is compliance driven, and it's tick boxy, and they don't really care too much about the learning so much as we've done our due diligence, and now we're not liable anymore in case somebody gets injured on the job. So a lot of health and safety. And so it isn't about what's best for the learning so much as making sure we've ticked our boxes. Yeah. That being said, I've advocated and been given approval for creating a learning framework. But even in that process, how they're viewing a learning framework, and my direct supervisor in HR, I presented it, and she it just seems like we're really misaligned on purpose. And so it's something I've seen in multiple organizations I've been with now, and it just seems to be an ever-present issue. I'm not sure what everybody else's experience is. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'd like to hear it too. So does this make any sense?
Yeah, I would just
Julie.
echo Jesse, what you were saying. The previous company I worked at, they actually, part of what our CEO of 20 years talked about was we are a deliberately developmental organization. But what that really turned into was we're going to offer all of the CPE credits that our people need in order to keep their licensures. That's sort of how it translated. So similar where, I mean, it was learning, it was giving people stuff, but it was not so much for the purpose of learning and improving our work as it was about meeting that requirement for our people.
Yes, yes. And what progress are you making? You making progress?
I don't work there anymore, but
Oh, right, okay.
yeah. So it was, I mean, it was a constant battle of, you know, why are we doing these? And we had to follow, you know, in all of our training with whatever the CPE requirements were for how we, you know, how we had to design things, whether or not it was the best for the learning versus meeting their requirements.
Okay, thank you.
So an interesting follow-on to that is, so I worked for 10 plus years at HSBC, one of the largest banking organizations in the world. And in order to comply with the Financial Services Authority, you have to tick the box on compliance training for anti-fraud and anti-money laundering. But the actual outcome of the learning that we had to go through every year to comply is that you basically teach your workforce how to launder money.
Yeah.
Because it you know goes through it bangs on about the kind of like what are the limits and what you need to do to you know, to do knowledge checks and how the systems work and all the rest of it. You come out of it at the end and you have a lot of knowledge that you probably didn't have before on how to work for the mob, which is entirely not the point of doing the training. So,
did it work? Does the training work? Do you think that people were equipped?
Well, it depends
to
what
identify...
your what is the purpose of doing the training? To stop people from laundering money or being fraudulent,
or to comply with what the Financial Services Authority demands, to prove that in their terms you've got enough people who've ticked a box to
ticks the
get
box
you out
from
of trouble.
the compliance thing, so that we can prove to the Financial Services Authority that the training has been performed. But as an organization, you don't really want to empower your workforce to launder money on behalf of their clients. No, I would have thought.
I would probably agree with you. How far is...
Can I throw in a little thought there?
Yeah, please.
Jane, does that, if we go right back to the age-old knowledge, skills and attitude, does that mean they were giving them the knowledge and the skills, but needed to do a little bit more work on attitude to try and help people use it for the forces of goodness and niceness?
Yes, potentially if they had a less toxic workplace environment, they would be, it would de-incentivize people to actually go down the route of bending the rules to to launder money and perform fraud on offshore investments. But you know, yes, so a lot of it is about yes, I think in answer to your question.
Any other points or queries?
Nigel, just while I'm having a good time off mute, sorry. I was thinking about you giving bits of corn to pigeons and digital badges. And I've had one of those nasty moments where I was thinking in a workshop, I spend so much time affirming behaviour, giving positive reinforcement to the behaviours that I'm looking for. How much of that is rewarding behaviour and how much of that is just giving them little bits of corn because they've done the right thing?
What do you
think? I'm feeling a little unsettled.
Yeah, but if you don't model behaviour, it's very interesting. As soon as you get into behaviour, you aren't far away from Skinner. in some ways, because you're teaching people to behave in a particular way. I guess the difference would be if there's a clear understanding why these behaviors are desired and the consequences of not following through, rather than just automatically doing something because it's being modeled and there's some brownie points for complying with those behaviors. So it's the profundity of which you understand why you should behave in that particular way. That's the difference. But yes, I think a lot of supposedly quite sophisticated behavior change is based on you encourage people to behave in a particular way because they get rewards for behaving in a particular way, and they get demerits for not behaving in a particular way. And sometimes they get fired for not behaving in a particular way. It's not very far away from behavior if there's no clear understanding or embracing of that. So yes, it's a good point. It's a fair point. So we get on to, what in a learning organization, how does that reflect on individual performance and individual behaviors? And I think we have to pick that up for Rich's sake, but it's very, very important, that relationship between the individual and the organization. And what I'm going to argue, which you can disagree with, but what I'm going to argue is that in a learning organization, what I've seen, what my research evidence seems to indicate, is that the organization, being part of that organization, actually determines the behavior. So that you behave in a way that reflects the organizational values, and therefore in a learning organization, you share, you help, you support, you work together to solve problems naturally, because that is the way the organization operates. Whereas in other organizations, the last thing you would do is share, the last thing you would do is help, the last thing you do is ever admit you didn't know anything, and the last thing you would do is admit you've made a mistake, because all of those cultures, all of those things are punishable by, often by death. These are all career limiting. Whereas if you can create an organization where the opposite is true, that you are praised for admitting you don't know, that there are brownie points for offering help and support to people, that the organization, that a rich learning organization creates rich learning amongst the workforce. And that doesn't necessarily reflect courses and access to courses. They can go on or not go on. It's the way in which the organization begins to solve its own problems, in a continuous way, rather than collapsing or waiting for some formal structure to kick in or essentially be told what to do. So Jesse says, sounds like fostering psychological safety helps her. Yeah, I would say even more strongly, Jesse, that without psychological safety, you don't get a learning culture. I'm going to come on to that in a minute, but I think that
I would counter that by saying every organization is a learning culture. It's just, what are you learning? You're learning to keep to yourself, and if you stand up too high, you're going to get your head bit off. I could learn that. Now I know what to do and how to react. So it's a strong learning culture, which is, I put that little peak caveat in there, is one that says, hey, I have a gap here. Can you help support me with this knowledge gap or behavior gap?
Yes, or we could say a positive or a negative learning culture. That there is, you're right. I think that every organization has a culture, whether it's manifest or not. Every organization has some kind of attitude to learning, whether it's manifest or not. And a lot of this stuff is unwritten. And some of the way that you can move the organization forward is to make the unwritten clearer to the whole organization. I'm working with one organization at the moment to do exactly that, to bring out for the executive board exactly how it feels to work in the organization, and how it feels to learn or not learn, how it feels when you're not on top of the job, or when you need help and support that isn't forthcoming. So the idea is that in itself does nothing, but in making it manifest and clear, you can then say, these are the key things that we have to address, and to address those helps us move forward. So if I just share with you, I'll just jump, I think, and share with you the this model of the learning culture model, which I created in my last book. I'm going to let Matthew in. We should have had a vote on that. Should we let Matthew in? Everyone, yep, okay. No, oh dear, it's hard. Matthew, there's a mixed view
It
here.
depends. Did he bring us any pigeons?
Or at least pieces of corn.
Yeah,
You can have
at least
anything
pieces
you
of-
want.
You can have the corn. I will have the pigeon, preferably in a red wine sauce.
Oh.
I brought a granola bar.
Well done, Matthew.
You
never come empty-handed. You never come empty-handed. It's fantastic to see. Anyway,
Sorry
thanks
for
joining us,
interrupting.
Matthew. You're not interrupting at all. We're just looking at what we've been talking about, which is really interesting, is the elements that build a learning culture, and the relationship between learning and other things that would apparently be nothing to do with learning, like trust and empowerment, engagement, the way leadership manifests those. And then at the next level down, collaboration, sharing, and purpose, and the degree of autonomy that people have. And what came very clearly through my book, what in the research, was that if you don't fix the things on the outside, you're never going to get the learning culture, that machine rolling. You'll never get the energy from learning. And learning is an energy in an organization, I think. And it's an energy that allows organizations to self-correct, rather like a gyroscope in an airplane cockpit allows the pilot to self-correct. So that, for example, out of all of these, the one that came up again and again was trust. In a low trust organization, there is no chance of building a learning culture, because if you don't trust the people you are with, you would never admit what you don't know. You would never make yourself vulnerable in front of them, and you would never help them, because that might be used against you at some other point, at some other place. So trust, really very important. And linked to that, your sense of engagement. Engaged people, disengaged people aren't interested in learning. And this is where I think the skills paradigm falls down. That if you're not engaged, even if you're forced to go through skill development, doesn't mean you're going to implement it, doesn't mean you're going to take it seriously, doesn't mean you're going to admit what you know and what you don't know in that environment. Like if you look at some of the ridiculously complex skills taxonomies where they ask people to rate themselves, you know, that the more toxic the organization, the higher the rating. Because why admit a weakness which could be held against you? Much better to overrate yourself and hope that no one discovers it. So these things become counterproductive, like getting a sense of where everyone is so we can outline the weaknesses becomes another form of barrier and masking and shielding. And in low trust organizations, those things are way more prevalent than in high trust organizations. So that, you know, if you want to build a learning organization, you have to start with trust. And I'm very happy if that's an issue, to work with one or more of you. That could be an office hours conversation about how we build higher trust in organizations. I think there are some very strong ways or simple ways of doing that. But with trust, it's about consistency. Trust is slowly won, easily lost. And to talk about empowerment, you know, the levels of empowerment. Why do people feel empowered and engaged, and why they don't feel empowered and engaged? You know, in my experience, if you ask people, they will tell you the answer. And one of the things that has come strongly from all my research is that we don't do enough field work. We don't actually know what's going on in our organizations. We don't actually know what's going on in our client organizations either. And those things are, you know, ultimately fatal. If you just take on board what people tell you is the problem, it's usually not the problem. And therefore, you don't end up solving the problem. You solve a kind of fantasy, and you end up with what Argyris talks about is type 1 problems that you solve by bringing in systems and programs that don't actually affect the organization at all. they're sticking plasters. If you want to get at double loop learning, you get at that double loop, it does involve and implicate everyone. And many organizations don't want to look at those implications. They kind of hide away from those implications. So that's my model. You've got to start fixing those outside things before you can begin to fix the inside ones, and before you can begin to deal with some of the bigger, trickier problems that exist in organizations. So I'm talked way far too much. I'm going to put you into groups of, how many are you? Groups of 4, I think. And I'm just going to give you 10 minutes. Let me just create 4 breakout rooms, assign you automatically. And I'm not going to put myself in so I can move around. And I'm going to create the breakout rooms, and I'm only going to give you 5 minutes. But I just want you to reflect on what we've talked about, and how important you think organizational learning is, and what do you understand it to be. Are you getting more confused, less confused, or you've got a very strong idea about where organizations can help individuals learn and in themselves can be centers for learning? So just 5 minutes, that's all. And I will create them and I'll bring you out of them at 5 to the hour. So I'm going to open the rooms now. So there's 3 or 4 in each room. Hey guys, thanks for coming back. I've just been looking at the chat, so thank you, Rich. There's been some really useful debate, and I'll capture that. But Rich, so I see 4 flavors of organizational learning. No deliberate learning strategy. People learn to get by. We love learning, by a large library of generic training. I let people do whatever they like with it. Learning tied to career advancement, about competency frameworks and certification and so on. Then finally, learning as a means of working effectively and getting better. Many ways, learning from others and by learning resources. So I think if you're talking about a learning organization, then it has to be about learning and supporting others and focusing on making the organization better, not making individuals better. I think that is the key point that we've got to take away. So what I want is some feedback from the groups. There was, let me just go through them. In room 1, Serena, Rich, Megan and Marion. Any conclusions or anything that I should write down immediately and never forget?
I just sort of thought, as learning professionals, I think we get distracted by the focus on individual. And I think there's a hope that what we're doing will have a ripple effect, and like you're building individuals and you're hoping that it will ripple out into greater team performance or greater organizational performance. And I think we don't get distracted by that, but I think that's just where your energy naturally goes. And I think I was saying to them, I think about learning culture all the time, but I don't know that I've ever really done anything concrete about it. And it made me think, Nigel, about how you're coming in to help run some action learning sets for our senior leaders in December when you're back in Australia, and how, we're scheduling these sessions to teach them about how to have these effective collaborative group sessions, but we still had to schedule it for them. And I guess really what I think we're talking about is, in the ideal world with good organizational learning, those things would start to happen of their own accord without learning and development having to schedule them and bring people in. Yeah.
In some ways, a good learning organization, L&D is out of the way. It's facilitating, it's enabling, it's putting tools in place, it's monitoring, but it's not actually doing, because it doesn't need to do, because the organization is looking after itself. And people are solving their own problems on a day-to-day basis. And what you're doing, Megan, is looking at leadership development and trying to turn it from an event into a continuous process. And that is tricky when people have been taught to see learning as events and processes and things that often, if you look, I'm sure in HSBC doing that compliance training was a bloody nightmare. that you had to, you had to twist people's arms, or you told them if you don't do this, you'll be fired. So people did it, but that wasn't creating a love of learning. I would imagine it was creating the exact opposite, a real irritation with the wretched people who made me do this. And that sadly is you, Jane. You were one of that blooming Jane Tandy. If I didn't have to do all that rubbish, I could get on and do my work. Yes, it's true. So what about room 2, which is Claire, Jessie, and Matthew? You were laughing, Matthew, apparently, which is completely out of order. Laughing, my goodness. Anyone would think this was fun.
Well, I don't believe in fun, but
no, it's exactly.
Well, we were talking about some of the contradictions of having a leadership culture, driving toward a culture, a singular culture, and the need to still focus on inclusion, diversity,
yes,
and so forth, and that having one culture or an aspirational culture is often overly simplistic, and that companies tend to ignore the nuance, and they can actually, in conflict with what they espouse, create more problems than they intend. And they should hire you more often.
Well, it goes without saying. Sadly, most people are far more objective than you are, Matthew, and therefore they make their decisions based on data and fact. So I think that point about the complexity of culture is very, very important, and I hope that we don't end up with naive views of what cultures are as they work through organizations, and that we understand the value of diversity. One of the, if I just very briefly share that my screen again with my model, you'll see that diversity is a kind of a bolt-on. It wasn't there at the beginning, and that was a huge error of judgment on my part. It became embarrassing, so I put it in, but I didn't quite know how to put it in. What I wanted to do was have diversity informing everything. And it is, and organizations which don't have a diversity of thought and a diversity of aspiration and a diversity of perspective will never manage to deal with complexity. If everyone thinks the same thing, that's simplicity, not complexity. So at the heart of it, I think, is diversity. As you said, Matthew, absolutely at the heart of it is diversity. So you're right. You're 100% right. And a kind of monotheistic culture, it is not ever going to deal with diversity. Culture is complex because it has to embrace exactly what you just said, and therefore a learning culture has to be pluralistic. We have to offer many ways of learning, many ways of working together to learn, and not just this is it, my way or the highway, in terms of culture and in terms of learning culture. So you're right. You can see from the model that I grappled with this for a long time on how can I try to capture what I'm learning from those organizations and from that research, and that was the best I could come up with. So it's probably not very good, and I'm sure that we could all sit and do something a lot more helpful. But what it did emphasize was that to get at the kernel of learning, you have to do a whole bunch of other things. You have to put a whole bunch of other things in place. So yeah, thank you, Matthew.
And I think that to further that thought, when you focus on diversity in a company and make sure that people are open-minded enough to accept that people may view things differently, may live their life differently, and that different is not bad or not to be threatened by. It makes you learn stuff, then it's easier to replicate in a learning context. The input of something new, something different, something you haven't seen or heard before.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think you're also right that if you do embrace diversity, it has to incorporate learning as well. You can't have a multiplicity of views, but this is the way you do learning, because that's not the way human beings operate. Human beings have preferences. I'm not saying that we play to those preferences all the time, but I am saying that if we make learning conscious, So we learn in those moments, we learn from our work, we learn from conversations, we learn from solving problems. If you can surface the complexity of the ways in which organizations learn, I think that is very, very helpful. Just as we celebrate with that focus on diversity, we celebrate what is different in terms of people's attitude, views, lifestyle, whatever it might be. I don't know in AstraZeneca, Marion, when Brian Murphy was learning leader of AstraZeneca, I don't know if you knew Brian, but one of the things that Brian was really obsessed with for a while was helping staff learn to learn. And he spent a lot of time trying to help people take the learning out of the workflow, the learning moments of their day, and share them and put them back into the workflow. And he's dealing with post-grad chemists, and they're wow. And I know this is incredible. I never even reflected on my day-to-day learning. So he was trying to make that conscious, that process that is kind of inherent or not inherent in many organizations, to make it conscious. And he had some success. You can argue. Yeah, he had some success.
He did. No, he was amazing. I miss having him at AstraZeneca. It's too bad that he left, because he was instrumental through the HR in rolling out a program that everyone has embraced globally, that embeds learning in everything we do. And it ladders up into the values and how we do things like, I'm sure companies do it too, like pulse surveys that tap into the level of collaboration, engagement, trust, et cetera, and so forth. So I have to say, it's very good at AstraZeneca. And yeah, we were lucky to have the influence of and the impact of Brian Murphy.
Yeah, and maybe at some point during these 3 sessions, you can talk a little bit about how does that manifest itself? What does that really mean for the individual member of staff, and how that reflects across the organization? Would you do that? Would you share that with us? That would be very interesting. Good. Thank you. Right, we have a date. We're going to do that. Thank you. Jesse, you were going to say you've been putting your hand up, and I apologize.
Well, one of the things kind of a little contradictory to that is learning is usually a result in some sort of struggle. And if I'm going to ask you to learn to juggle right now, and it's going to be tough, and it's going to be, in some senses, frustrating. So to add learning onto people's plate creates additional struggle, which can hurt staff retention, which can hurt all kinds of different the employee experience as a whole. So it's something that I always caution some of my stakeholders with is learning what we're really wanting to do here. And I think it's why change management exists. If we're changing to a new platform, we're moving from Zoom to Teams, we're going to have to learn a new platform. I'm going to resist that. So let's not just look at learning as the answer to all of our challenges. Do we want to be adding, is there a time and space for learning? Because it does result in struggle, time, all of these other factors. So as I was saying, our local healthcare system here on the island through the pandemic, maybe we want to reduce some of our learning so they could just focus on things that they know, because we're starting to see burnout. So just something I wanted to throw out there.
It's very important. It's very, very important. I call it discomfort. That one of the things that we've done with learning is made it easy. We've simplified and packaged to make it easy for people. And therefore we never expose them in a sense to that real world where things are more complex and difficult. And I think if we can embrace discomfort, if you can create a climate where people can be discomforted, but with support, then that is beyond exciting. Then if you think of the great learning moments in your life, and the great learning insights in your working life, I would be surprised if they're not accompanied by discomfort, where you are being asked to challenge your view of the world, some of your certainties. And this is the problem, I think, when we talk about the skills agenda, that the problem is that you're asking people to move from where they know to where they don't know and they might know. And that gap is scary. And many people don't want to do it. So that no one's going to say, no, I don't want to learn new skills. but they're going to do it in a way that makes sure they never expose themselves, and they never often implement what they've been taught, and they're offered no support and help. So, you know, I think that to be exposed and to feel that you are learning with no support is really scary, and that's when you get butterflies in your stomach, and where you kind of psychologically you freeze. But where you're engaged and learning and entirely discomforted, but you're doing that with support, it becomes really exciting, and it becomes a real focus on the next stage of your life almost. You know, it's you taking on a new persona almost. And if you can have that, if you can create that on a day-to-day basis in organization, in other words, the organization is never complacent about what's going on in the world, then I think that can be, again, an incredibly engaging place, and it ensures more longevity in that organization. It doesn't guarantee it, but it's much more likely than in organizations that are complacent, think they know everything.
Well,
and go on, Jesse.
Well, it's something Matthew and I actually have discussed before too, is the learner needs to see value. If I'm going to go through this struggle, and this is part of our culture, is this ongoing struggle we're kind of creating for ourselves that's associated with learning, what's the benefit? What's in it for me? How am I going to benefit from whatever it is I'm learning? And if it doesn't tie in, or I don't think I need it, then I'm going to really resist. If all of a sudden we're changing everything that we're going to do. And so I think Matthew kind of introduced the self-determination theory and how it kind of ties into learning. But I think it's really, really important as we're looking at a learning organization, is we're creating a culture, but we also want to have everybody understand that the why. Why is this important? And let them come up with the answer to the question instead of us saying, here's why it's important that you do this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you slightly anticipated me. There's self-determination theory. And what Edward Deci and Rich Ryan were saying, you know, we're talking 85, that intrinsic motivation, self-determination in human behavior. 85, that's quite a long time ago. That predates Argyris on organizational learning. And what they're saying is very much what I guess I'm saying, but slightly inelegantly and probably without as much evidence, that it's not just about you on your own. It is you feeling that your mastery is recognized. You feel effective, and you feel that effectiveness is recognized, and you have a choice. You are behaving in a particular way. But the most important thing, I think, in all of that is the third box there, relatedness, the need to feel connected and belonging with others. And that makes the other two things come alive. So, you know, I think self-determination theory is very, very important in this. And that is when, you know, that if you just jump to my model, that is when you get that learning culture churn, when the energy is going, because you're learning in context and in community, and you feel part of that community. And when you're learning together, you know, when you're solving a problem together, like the group looking at the Roman mosaics, there's something really life enhancing about that process, and definitely energy causing. But we do a lot in organizations to try to prevent that, you know, to stop that process, and to, you know, atomize individual endeavor and individual achievement in order to be able to measure and model. You know, and if you have performance reviews that just focus on what you did, you know, that if you reward people based on individual performance, you're just reinforcing that cycle. So you're not going to have there's no point in talking about a learning organization without changing what you recognize and how you get people to perform. And in a company like WD-40, the only recognition that a leader gets in terms of their performance is how well they help the team, how well they help the organization live the values, and what they did specifically to grow and develop and bring their team on. They're only measured on what they do for others, so that they can push themselves and say, look at me, look at me. But that's not recognized. That's seen as a deficit almost, because the organization has to learn. and everyone in it has to grow and move. And that is why it's such a dynamic organization, and why it grew so substantial, even though all it sells is stuff in a can. That the chief executive grew it from a market cap of 220 million to 1.6 billion. It's absolutely extraordinary growth, and without any difference really in the output of the product. But everything else changed. What people, but the nature of the role, the nature of the organization, and how you worked with other people, everything else changed. So we still haven't talked to room 3, which is Julie, Lisa, and Scott. Any feedback from you?
One thing Scott was sharing that I thought was interesting to think about, and Scott, chime in if I'm not quite capturing this correctly, but he was talking about, how in the model of what we do to create a learning culture within our organization, you don't actually focus on addressing the learning, you're focusing on the organization, and then sort of the outcome there is the learning that happens. So it's a little bit, it feels like a flip in paradigm in how we often think as we think about designing learning courses and training events. Yes. And things. Scott, did I summarize what you were trying to share?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I try and filter my cynicism a bit. So I think what I was trying to get at was that often we're giving learning challenges, or it's framed as a learning challenge because that's what we do, or the group that we're in. But to truly, and this is not anything new, but in order to solve really the problem, or the crux of it, is in the organization. Right. And learning can only do so much. It may just be a band-aid on an arterial bleed, right? So we hope it's not, but often that's what it can be. And that puts us in what I like about the idea of thinking about organizational learning is that it's the organization which really leads in some ways. But it's difficult because we're isolated often as L&D folks. We don't have our fingers in the organizational pie. That sounds weird, but so yeah, that's just kind of what I was riffing on, I think.
And I think that's an incredibly important conclusion. And what I'm hoping is that out of these conversations, that we'll recognize that learning isolated on its own, doing its good work, is not enough. It may be useful, but it's not sufficient to shift the organization. You have to have an organization view. And this is where fieldwork comes in. You have to understand the organization and link with the organization and co-develop with the organization. But we isolate learning.
Yeah, I think that's it. Absolutely. We've painted ourselves into a corner because we don't think about creating business value, and we don't think about the drivers of the business from a business perspective.
It's because we just start with the assumption that somebody's buying what we're selling, right? So if you go and ask an organization what your priorities are, I don't think learning cracks the top 5. I mean, only lucky if it cracks any list. And therefore, flipping that conversation around, like Julie and Scott were saying, is that, so what are your priorities, and how does the development of your people contribute to those priorities, or you achieving those organizational priorities? And that's not where most of L&D starts. Most of L&D starts with, what content can I purchase, what platform should I put it on, and how do I get people to use it?
That's exactly right. Yeah, so that you're starting in the wrong place. If you start in the wrong place, it's very unlikely you'll get to the destination. Yeah,
and you're always viewed as a cost center.
And and therefore you're the first to be cut and so on, because you're a cost. And what we're talking about is a kind of organic process emerging out of the organization. That is very different from a cost center where you're supplying stuff into the organization, you're packaging and supplying. So yeah, I think that's right. What about last group? Heather, Jane, and Shelley. What about you?
We were looking at your learning model, and I think we've got some practical strategies now. Like, okay, if there are issues with, trust and leadership and empowerment, engagement, well, I guess my question first is, how do we measure those things? Like, how are you identifying where the problems are exactly,
Yep.
and then yeah, how do we change those things and know that we've succeeded in them.
Yeah, I excellent questions. I think you're right, because if you don't know how to identify the problems and you don't know whether you've succeeded in solving them, that's an issue. That's a challenge, because what are you doing? So I think we need to work on that. And in my mind, there's one sentence which I found. Doesn't MBTI fix everything? Of course it does, Jesse. It always has and always will.
Only if I can follow it up with a smile sheet.
Yes, exactly. MBTI and a smile sheet, job done. Let's just cancel this program. We've already solved the problems. We've already solved the problems. That what I was the question that I like to ask is, what stops you from doing good work? You know, if you ask people what stops you from doing your best work, what stops you from doing good work, that takes you down a journey that inevitably takes you to the heart of the culture of the organization, and that is your starting point. That is how the organization impacts on people, and is actually inhibits doing good work rather than encourages and supports good work. And they will tell you, I've never had a problem with people refusing to say what drives them crazy about the organization. And that combination of what drives them crazy gives you a real sense of the organization. And often some of the challenges are small. You can solve them quite quickly. And you can do that. And some of them are profound, and you need to work on how you solve them. But to me, it's like kind of unblocking that process of learning in the organization. So instead of putting stuff in, you're taking stuff away. And I think that's interesting. Yeah, sorry, Heather, you're going to say something. I can see, I can sense it on your face.
That leads to another question. So like, who do you ask? Do you ask everybody in the organization that question? Do you just ask specific people? And what context, like how do you ask that? Is it a confidential survey, or is it in focus groups, or what?
Yeah, I think that it depends on the organization. I have to say it depends, because the difference in AstraZeneca, for example, on the one hand, and Julie's organization on the other. That's one has got 60 people or whatever, 70 people or 200, I can't remember. And AstraZeneca, how many? 90,000, 80,000, something like that. Probably, roughly. Anyway, so the approach is very, very different. But what I think that if you've got a massive organization, then things like pulse surveys are quite interesting. But to me, you get the most information when you sit with people. It doesn't have to be around a table, but metaphorically around a table, and just ask them to share what frustrates them. And then you can, once you've got the kind of body of response, you can test that out across the organization. Say, what people are saying is this, does that resonate for you? And people will say, oh my God, that's exactly right. Or no, not in my bit of the organization. And the more contradiction you get, the more you then need to explore. But and I think if there's a bit of the organization that appears to be broken, like often you hear the sales team are useless, we're just not selling enough. They should be put on a course to sell stuff. That could be a very good place to start, because what you find that if the sales team are not so good, got absolutely nothing to do with their ability to sell. It's all to do with the culture, what they're provided with, what their customers want, and what the organization provides. It's a much bigger indicator of wider problems. So therefore, that is a good place to start. Find the good place to start. And it's often when people moan about the organization, oh my goodness, these people here are absolutely hopeless. That's the place to go and find out. And then also, this bit is wonderful. Oh, there's such a wonderful team. Go in there and find out why they're so wonderful. And then you've got grounds to prepare. But I think if you see yourself as a field worker that you only understand by being out there and exploring in the field, you get so much closer to what's actually the heartbeat of an organization than if you do it theoretically, or the worst of all, accept what someone tells you. When someone says, Julie, go fix this. There's a problem here. Go and sort that out. give them this, give them that. You know, it's inevitably the worst possible advice that you could ever have in your entire life. So let me just share one thing. I just want to share the screen. I managed finally in your little exodus to gather your comments from the word cloud. That I managed to stop it jumping all over the screen. So, you know, I want to use that. I'll come back to this because I think you're talking about really useful targets. And I would really hope that you've at least got some tools to do those sorts of things and to develop your thinking and to create the mental models and to understand the way organizations learn a lot more clearly than you might have done at the beginning, and the link between individual performance and organizational performance. So yes, I think that's a great indicator. Thank you for that. And that big word there, insight. And if there's no insight, then I've really failed you, and I apologize profusely for that. I'm not going to say that yet. Now, finish on this slide because we've got a few minutes to go. And this is something I took from Deloitte in 2018. And what Deloitte, they do these insight reports every year. And I'm going to have to take it down from full screen because everything's blocking my screen. So the Global Human Capital Trend Survey in 2018, I like this a lot because what it does is it takes us from the two axes, the movement to focusing more on the world externally and the movement to operating as teams, not as individuals. And so they called the coming together social enterprise. I actually think it's probably would be better named learning enterprise. They wanted their unique term. But you can see if in the bottom left, traditional organization, you could say in there traditional learning and development is down in that corner, siloed operating model, totally internal focus, not just internal to the learning or to the organization, the company they work, but internal to themselves. You know, one of my frustrations with L&D is this inward-looking L&D. They polish, you know, I said in my doctoral thesis that their L&D, they're not just moving the deck chairs on the Titanic, they're polishing the brass straps that hold them in place. And that's a terribly cynical thing to say. But it really drove me mad where the reference points are all learning reference points. People love this. Oh, they enjoy having this, or that this has been good for them, but nothing about the organization and what problems it's solving and what it's doing to the organization, and no attempt to measure that. So traditional organization, the way you break out of that is by that bifurcated movement from focusing much more on the nature of the world, and for L&D that can often be the nature of the organization you're working in, and much more on working on teams and getting teams to develop. They called it symphonic. I'm not sure that's caught on. I haven't heard a lot of people say, oh, we're just doing, we're running a symphonic structure now. We've gone for symphony. It was a kind of Deloitte weird term. But it doesn't matter whether you think social enterprise and symphonic functioning is a good terms, but I think that their heart is absolutely in the right place. It is about that movement, that dual movement, and that links back to my model. It's this moving outside, dealing with the outside world, while at the same time focusing more on getting people to work together and solving some of the things that stop people working together, that keeps them apart, and keeps them focused entirely on individuals. So collaboration, internal integration, increased external focus, and building teams as the driving force for change in the organization rather than individuals. I think we're getting somewhere towards how that works. So this is just starting. What I'm going to do with you in the next one, I hope many of you will come through, we're going to focus on organizational learning, what it looks like both literally and metaphorically, and we're going to work on building together some kind of reference points for each organization that you've got. So I want you to come away thinking, in my organization, we could do this. So I don't know what this is yet, and I hope it's really different. I hope that AstraZeneca doesn't come up, that Marion and AstraZeneca doesn't come up with exactly the same thing as Heather. Because if we're doing it right, we're thinking about our organization and what our organization might want to do. And also about our own personal development. How do we fit into this ecosystem and this model? And how do we, what did you say, Jen? I'm more in favor of a concerto. It allows me to shine in solo whilst making people think I'm collaborating. That's absolutely true. But in some ways, in a learning organization, people shine as individuals. They absolutely shine as individuals. They are recognized for their expertise, but they're also recognized for how well they add to the rest of them. They don't go off and do a kind of solo that is out of time with everyone else. They're working in concert. So yeah, I get that consider. I'm not saying that we abandon individuals at all, but what I'm saying is that we work focus together on what we can do collectively. And in my experience, what we can do collectively is always greater than what we can do as individuals. And yet we've been led to believe that in this atomistic culture, that it's the individual is all that matters and their performance is all that matters. And that's what they're measured on, what they're paid on. And as soon as you do that, you end up with the kind of organizations we've got at the moment. We go back to the Washington Post, toxic, destructive, and unhealthy organizations in every sense of the word. So I think learning is part of our health. And the more we learn about what keeps the human body and the human mind fresh and agile, we know that learning is somewhere at the heart of that. So jazz is important. Yeah, its ability to be able to riff, but also to come back to the whole. A good jazz band is as much a band as it is a collection of kind of weird individuals, wild individuals. And I hope I'm not insulting anyone who plays jazz. Right, okay. Any final points before we end? I think we should, I don't want to keep you longer than I promised I would. I've already done it by a minute. But just finish, let's finish on one word. If you found this, start with Scott. Useful, not useful, one word as you come through.
Useful, engaging, good.
Good. Heather, one word.
Inspiring.
Shelley, one word.
Foundational.
Good, yeah, great. Marion, one word.
Refreshing.
Excellent. Matthew, one word. Chocolate bar. No.
Comfort.
What? A concert.
Comfort.
Comfort. Yeah. Thank you. Lisa, one word.
I'll have to hyphenate it. Key reminders.
Okay, good. Worth getting up at 5 a.m. for. You have to say
I've
yes.
had a great time, but I need another
Good.
coffee
I've had a
now.
great time. Yeah, I bet you do. Possibly asleep. Megan, one word.
Actionable.
Great. Excellent. Good. Yep, I hope so. Jane, one word.
Informative.
One word, Rich.
Stimulating.
Yeah, and thank you for your model. I think there are levels, and we're going to focus on some of those at the next stage. Serena, one word.
Insightful, just to go full circle to our word cloud.
Good. Yes, thank you. All right, so I really do hope you'll be back. And the second session is on the 7th of November. I'm in the US next week, so I can't do very much next week, but we'll be back on Monday, the 7th of November. And don't forget that if anyone is interested in one-on-one or one-on-few, office hours is tomorrow from 9 to 10 Eastern time. I don't know what that does to you, Megan. What is that? Is that even worse for you?
No future sessions from here on in work for Lisa and Nigel. No, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Nigel, I looked up the office hours. It's midnight for us.
Yeah.
Midnight.
And session 2 and 3 are like, yeah.
But I have good news. But I have
Matt's
good
sorting
news.
it out. Matt's sorting it out for us.
Matt is sorting it out.
No,
Sort it
I'm
out,
not
Matt.
sorting it. I am
Sorry,
incompetent.
Esther?
Esther is sorting it out. She is way more
Yes.
competent than me. She's not only working with Nigel, she's working with Will, she's working with Julie, she's working
Thank
with
you so much.
several of
I
the
put in
folks.
my wish list.
I'm Unfortunately, sadly, we only have 4 people in Australia and 1 person in Japan. And so for us to accommodate the majority on a regular basis, we did what we did. But as we've mentioned, as long as you let us know and give us a little bit of patience while we work it out, we will find a solution that doesn't annoy our faculty too much, and also make sure that you guys are satisfied.
Yeah.